Hello and welcome. I'm Rosemary Pena, president of the BGHRA and adjunct professor of German Studies at UBC Vancouver. Our conversation today is the 9th in our Black Germany and Beyond event series. Dr. Emily Fraser-Rath and I are once again delighted to chat with Jeannine Kantara and Jeanette Footman and to learn more about their shared yet divergent childhoods in the former DDR and their life experiences beyond reunification. But before our conversation begins, I'll ask Emily to please share a little about our work together and then formally introduce our special guests. Emily?
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you, Rosemary. My name is Emily Fraser-Rath, and I'm a visiting assistant professor of German Studies at Davidson College, which is a small liberal arts institution located just north of Charlotte, North Carolina in the US. I'm also the executive director of the BGHRA. We are so excited to invite Jeannine Kantara and Jeanette Footman back to the BGHRA today. Today is April 21st, 2022. Dr. Pena, our Davidson College students in this semester's version of German 351, Race, Gender, and Migration, and I hosted a conversation with Jeannine and Jeanette just about a month ago in class. We are excited to have the opportunity now to continue this conversation in a more public forum and for all of you to have the opportunity to engage with our guests this time around. Today, we'd like to thank our co-sponsors whose support we greatly appreciate. Thank you to Dr. Angelica Fenner at the University of Toronto and to the Waterloo Center for German Studies. Thank you to the Department of Central, Eastern, and Northern European Studies at the University of British Columbia and Dr. David Gramling. And thank you as well to Dr. Skylar Arndt-Briggs, Executive Director of the DEFA Film Library at UMass Amherst for your support in making today's event possible. So thanks again to Angelica, David, and Sky, and to all of our collaborators and co-conspirators. So without further ado, though, I'd like to introduce to you Jeanette Footman and Jeannine Kantara. So Jeanette and Jeannine saw each other for the first time at a wedding of mutual friends of their parents in East Berlin. That was in January 1978. However, their fathers, one from Cameroon, the other from Guinea, already knew each other since 1964. As they were both sent as students to the former German Democratic Republic, or GDR, one of them by an opposing party to his government, and the other by his government. Both fell in love with German women, had families, and decided to stay. When Jeanette and Jeannine, who were then 10 and 9 respectively, met at this wedding reception, they became fast friends, but little did they know that their friendship would last over 4 decades and that it would continue to this day. Well, Jeanette Footman, a mother of 3, lives with her family in Indianapolis, where she co-owns the Perk Cafe with Alice Matsuo. Jeannine Kantara resides in Berlin with her husband and 2 children. Today, we are excited to talk with Jeannine and Jeanette about their childhood in East Germany and how their families escaped to West Berlin. What was it like to grow up in a communist society? What was it like to be a Black child in the GDR? How did these two, their fathers, end up in East Germany? How did their parents cope with the challenge of being Black and a white couple and raising Black children? Is there an actual history of Black people in East Germany? And how do these 2 women look at this evolution of the Black communities in the United States and Germany? So these are the questions we're going to discuss, and hopefully much more to give insight into this particular aspect of the Black German experience, which hitherto is little known. So without taking up much more time, I'd like to encourage everyone to submit your questions via the Q&A function down below or via the chat. And I'm going to turn things over now to Jeanette and Jeannine.
Yes, thank you very much, Rosemary and Emily, for having us back. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be back. And while I was thinking about how we can actually fill this conversation, I was thinking, what a great opportunity just to talk with my oldest best friends just about our childhood experiences and about what life was for us for the past 40 years or something. Actually,
Or
we know each other
something,
more
yeah.
than
44.
something. And I realized, yes, for us, for the both of us, it's just a normal friendship, but for most people, it's probably not a normal friendship. And we both realized not much is known about the Black Germans in East Germany, and there are very few stories of Black Germans from the East of our generation, and we are happy to have the opportunity to just give a little insight about what it was like to grow up in the former GDR. As for me, I was born in 1968 in East Berlin. And my father, as you said, came as a student in 1964 from Guinea to East Berlin. He was sent by the government. He couldn't actually choose where he was going. When he was told he was going to Germany, he was quite happy, but then he learned it was not West, but East Germany. His excitement was not that big as previously, but he said, okay, it's Europe, and I have a go. He arrived in February of 1964, which was a particularly cold winter, and my dad told me it was quite a shock to arrive at the airport in Berlin Schönefeld, and together, I think, with about 15 or 17 other young men from West Africa. And first, they had to go to Leipzig in order to study the German language. They went to the Herder Institute and spent a year there. And then my father actually was sent to East Berlin to study economics. And the thing is, he couldn't actually choose where to go, and neither could he choose.
Can't hear
But
you.
oh, you can't.
We couldn't hear you for a minute, yeah.
Can
That
you hear
your
me
father
now?
couldn't choose, yeah, that your
Yes.
father couldn't choose where to go.
He couldn't choose where to go, and he couldn't choose what to study.
Mhm.
And he told me economics was certainly not his first choice, but he was actually assigned to do 4 years in order to learn the East German economics, and then go back to his own country and implement a strategy in the newly how do you say
Independent.
independent African state, which didn't work out because of he met my mom and didn't want to go back. Instead, he actually founded a musical group which was called Les Gentils Compagnons. I don't know whether you still have that picture. We had it last time. Yeah, okay, maybe we can show it. And it was a group of young African musicians from several West African countries which toured the former GDR and just basically had fun. But they did everything but studying. And after a while I was there, and basically my dad wanted to stay in Germany, and which he couldn't. It was quite difficult. But before I go into that detail, maybe I let Jeanette talk a bit about her father's experiences.
Okay. Well, I was also born in Berlin, in East Berlin in 1967. And my father came through his political party, and from Cameroon, they sent him over to Europe to get an education, because he kind of had to flee because they were against the current government at that time. They wanted independence for Cameroon. And so he was sent by his party, and he came to Wipra, which is a small town first, also was quite cold winter time, and then he was sent to Jena, and he got an education as a photographer. So my dad became a photographer, and in 1964 he came to Berlin, and then he was met my mom in 1966, and actually I was born in 1967. Took 2.5 years for them to be able to get married, so they didn't get married until 1970. And so yeah, we kind of, happy family. My sister was born in 1969, and my father also had an older daughter already in 1963, which we always knew about, and she knew about us, and we would see each other during summer vacations when we got older, so we're all in contact. So everybody knew about everybody. And yeah, so he finished his studies and then also had to leave at some point East Germany, which I will get to after Jeannine. Keeps going. Oh, maybe one other thing I want to say. It's actually a great big thank you to Rosemary and Emily for us to be able to tell our stories here in this forum. And I can tell you right away, our story is not a sad story. So, which is kind of a nice thing, because usually when you hear about Black Germans or any kind of, growing up in East Germany, so our story is actually a good and positive and happy story.
Thanks, Jeanette. I do have the photos. Do you want me to show the photos of your father?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah. I unfortunately can't find. I don't know if I have the ones. So this is, what is this an image
That
of?
is me and my dad at the East Berlin zoo in East Berlin, and at that time you were able to pose with a little lion. So yes, so that's basically what we did.
I love your little face in that.
Yes, so very
Cute.
thoughtful. Yeah, very like, what's going on. Mm-hmm.
And then this one.
Yeah, that he was at his job. He was working for the DEFA at some point, which was film. Yeah, what do you call it? Yeah, where they made
Production
films.
company, yeah.
Right, production company in East Berlin, and he worked there, and he was on some kind of shoot there, and somebody took a picture of him.
Wonderful. And Jeannine, anytime you have photos, I can share them, or feel free to. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to look for them again. But yeah, as Jeanette said, our story is not a sad story. I wouldn't agree that it was always a happy story. It was definitely not. And it was certainly a story of being always the only one. And I think we were lucky in the respect that we always had a relationship with our fathers. I know many Black Germans of my generation didn't have any relationship with their fathers. Either they didn't know them, or the parents were mostly separated, and the fathers went back. So although my father went back to Guinea when I was 2 years old, he always stayed in contact with my mom. And he came back when I was 6 years old. So he was part of my childhood, not all the time, but he was there. But the experience in East Germany was one of being singled out all the time. The thing is that the question of racism wasn't really addressed in East Germany. For example, I learned at school that everybody or the Nazis were in the West. So nobody in East Germany, they didn't deal with their German past in the way they did in the West, which came quite late in the West as well. But in East Germany, there was no racism, there was no fascism, there was no capitalism. So we grew up thinking that everybody in the East was a Widerstandskämpfer, how do you say, was actually somebody fighting against fascism.
Yes.
And so it was always on the surface, the idea of friendship with all the
Nations.
nations of the world. The problem was people in the GDR couldn't travel anywhere, so they had no idea what life was like outside of East Germany. And I was particularly told when I was a child at school and everything that I was very lucky to be growing up in East Germany, because my relatives in Africa, they were poor, they had nothing to eat, and that it was a privilege actually to grow up in East Germany. I should be thankful. That's the idea that was always put in my head. Of course, my mom always tried to counter argue and tell me, no, that is not true. She read the letters from my father, and even if he was not physically there for quite some time, he always wrote, and he was a presence in my life. And so that was very difficult to balance the knowledge I had from my personal experience and what I learned at school or in my environment. But there was always a curiosity about my background, and it wasn't open racism, but it was always this: you should be grateful, you should be thankful. And of course, as a child, you don't question it that much, but after a while, you think, yeah, why should I actually be grateful? And if I have to be, does that mean I have to be twice as good as everybody else? So I try to always exceed their expectations. I try to be the best in the German language. I try to be on my best behavior, and I try to make them proud. And but of course, you never could, because you always were the odd one out, and that was a very difficult position to be in.
Maybe to
yeah.
cut into that, and that's probably for you even more so because you were the only child. See, with me, I had my sister, so I wasn't like the only one. So we had each other. So in that regard, I never had that feeling kind of, that I had to compete and had to be better than somebody else, even though I was always class best in school. And but yeah, I didn't have that because I had my sister at home. So, I guess we could pull strength from each other. And then from our last conversation, which Jeannine might get to, I had a very supportive teacher in elementary school. She was awesome. I never had the feeling she kind of singled me out. I was a part of the class. She just was an awesome woman and never made me feel different from any other child, or that I had to prove myself than any of the other children. So, and yeah, Jeannine has a different story or experience in that way.
Jeannine, Rosemary found the pictures, so I'll show them while you talk. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, my dad is the one, the tall one, the second from, or the third one from the right, in the middle.
And over.
Yeah.
The other way. The other. Right. No.
Yeah.
Next one. That one.
That's my dad.
I was. Yeah. There we go. Okay. One. 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
And I just love that picture. I'm not quite sure when it was taken, but it must have been around 1964, 65, something like that. Yeah.
And explain the odd man out in the picture. That wasn't actually part of the band.
There was probably a secret service agent from the Stasi, which was the secret agency in the GDR. and they were like minders actually. So if you had a bunch of Africans traveling the country, of course there had somebody be there to watch them. And yeah, he wanted to be in a picture. My dad said he couldn't do anything about it, so he's in a picture.
Oh no. And then this one.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah,
fun times.
So sweet.
remember when
Yeah.
that was taken?
Huh? Yeah.
Can you remember when that was taken? I don't know.
No, I think we looked older in there than what we were. I think it was 50, 60. We were not that old. So yes, I mean, it was the 80s, right? Big hair, big
It was
earrings.
there,
Yes.
definitely. Yeah. And yeah, when I say, okay, you had your sister, which is true. And for me, that is why when we met in January 78 at a mutual friend's wedding, this friend actually was also in the picture. I forgot to mention. He was also in the band of my dad. You were already in the West, I think.
I was
Yeah, he's
first
on the
for 6
left.
years. I moved to the West in 77, July 77, on my birthday, right? And so we met in January 78. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Exactly, and that was when we were still in the East, but I think the decision to leave was already made. I have to ask my parents about that again, but the wedding was actually in East Berlin in a cafe, and I think we were the only. No, we were probably not the only kids there, but for some reason we
kind of clicked. We just hooked up. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we hooked up. We were actually 8, 9, and 10 because your sister is a year younger than I am, and I was the middle one, and we were the 3 J's basically. It was Jeanette, Jeannine, and Juliette, and that was the first time we actually met. But after that, a few months after that, my mom and I went to Africa basically.
You're out. Can't hear you right now, Jeannine. Yeah, it's kind of frozen, the picture. Yes, now you're back.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was saying that my mom and we left a few months later and we moved to Ivory Coast because at that time my dad also had moved from Guinea to Ivory Coast, and I spent 9 months there. And before I went back to East Germany to my grandmother, my parents stayed on a bit longer. And after moving forth and back for several months, which was quite exhausting, we decided to move to the West, which we did in summer of 79, I think, yes. And of course, I had a friend there already. And that's when we just became inseparable. It was always people were saying, okay, if one was there, where's the other one?
Where's the other one? Exactly, yes.
We started to hang out all the time. And I think what the shared experience of growing up in East Germany was also something that where we bonded, and also we were the same age, we were teenagers. And it was I always spent a lot of time at your parents' home because it was an open house, basically. There were always people there. There was always good food, African food, and there were Africans there all the time, mostly French speaking, of course. And if you wanted to know what's up in Cameroon, in Guinea, in
Togo, wherever, yes, they were from everywhere.
Come to your parents' house, and you were always welcome. And basically, I spent all my free time there.
Yeah,
and you adopted me basically.
Wow. maybe it sounds so easy as moving from the east to the west. That's not how it was. So my dad, basically in 1973, he was told that he had to leave East Germany. We don't know to this day why that is. I'm hoping the next time I go to Germany, I will be able to look into the files that the Secret Service or from the GDR, the Stasi, had put together to find out what the reason was. And then it took actually my parents like 4 years to be reunited again. We had the chance in 1977 then to move over to West Berlin. They gave us basically a month. I remember the lady from the Stasi being in front of our door wanting to talk to my mom. And, 30 days later, we basically moved over to West Berlin. The thing was, first my mom asked that we could move to Cameroon, but my father had to prove that he had a job there, which he didn't. So then my mom had to write letters back then to the president of the GDR. What was his name? Not Honecker, he came later, Ulbricht, Walter Ulbricht. And, they were like, well, we don't want to lose our employees here, our workers. And so that was one of the reasons what they gave my mom why she couldn't reunite with my dad. And but she kept writing letters, and then we tried to move to France, and it basically took 4 years. The passport was ready actually in 74, and then in 77 we were able to move to France, although we didn't go to France because my dad worked in West Berlin, but he had a friend in France that had vouched that he's working there for him, and that's why we were able to go and leave East Berlin, and we just moved over and went over to West Berlin and never took the train to France. And because my parents had asked, or my mom had asked to move to France, we were still able then later on to keep going back to East Berlin, because if you would have gotten approved to move to West Germany, you would have not been able to go back even to visit your family in East Germany. And because of us asking to go to France, I was still able in the summers, during the summers, go see my grandmother for 3 weeks, stay with her, and move back and forth.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I made it sound like it was so easy. Of course, it wasn't easy. And my parents made a conscious effort to stay in the GDR, which wasn't possible for my dad, because after finishing his studies, the idea was that he should go back to Guinea, which of course he didn't want to because he had a family already. And so they made every effort that he could stay, but he couldn't. So that's why he had to leave when I was 2 years old. He tried to come back for 4 years and managed after 4 years, came back, they got married. He spent another 2 years, I think, and had to go back. So it was always back and forth. And that's when my mom decided that in order to live together, she will have to move to Africa. And as you said, she didn't apply for, you had something which was called Familienzusammenführung, which was called family reunion. So if since they were married and my mom actually asked to move to Africa, they agreed on doing that. However, my father didn't want us to come to Guinea for political reasons. He actually escaped to Ivory Coast and found a job as a teacher. And that's when we actually made the move to Ivory Coast. We couldn't go directly from East Germany to Ivory Coast. That's why we made a stop in France, in Paris, and spent about 6 weeks there with friends of my father's until he sent some money and we got the tickets to travel from Paris to Abidjan. And that's how my mom came to Abidjan. But it was difficult. It was a very difficult time for several reasons. And after several months, my parents decided, no, they had to send me back. So I had to go back to my grandmother living in East Berlin. Stayed with her for a few months, and then my mom came, and then we had the same status quo as before. My father was in Africa, my mom was in East Germany. What to do? And for the second time, then they decided, okay, if we can't stay in East Germany, if we can't stay in Africa, then we have to go to West Germany, to West Berlin. Now, how to do that? My mom actually applied to go back to Africa because my father was still there. However, this time she said she wanted to take a direct flight, and the direct flight was from West Berlin. So my mom and I had a, I don't know, I have to ask her again. I think it was a day visa to go to West Berlin in order to take a flight back to Ivory Coast, which we didn't. We stayed in West Berlin. And my father came later to West Berlin. That's how we ended up in West Berlin. And funnily enough, we could always travel, as you said, we could always visit our relatives in East Germany, which was a big relief for my mom because she left everything. And when she left, she thought she would never see her family again. But amazingly, we could, and which brought me to the idea that probably there is a file on us as well. They were always minding us, and I'd like to know at one point who was actually spying on us. And I'm just relieved that we could travel between 1979 and 1989 when the wall came down, which is 10 years. So we could see our family until they could come to the West, which was quite a relief. Yes.
Do we have any questions so far?
I know it's confusing. I know.
Yeah, so if we can clarify any things that might not be clear up until now. So,
Yeah.
well, maybe I just keep talking like Jeannine was saying. In my house, my parents, on the weekends, we always had the house full. There were always lots of Africans. So there was always lots of food. So, the identity of, being Black, I think in that regard, I grew up with a very healthy self-esteem. Because I had a lot of African people around me, and also the support from my mom's family, because they loved my dad. My dad was like, there was nothing bad you could say about my dad from the sides of my grandparents, my uncle, my aunt. They just loved my dad. My dad was, yeah, they were their favorite, so to speak. So, so in that regard, family life was very well. I was very well adjusted, with my mom's family. Unfortunately, I didn't get to meet my dad's side of the family until later on, but because we had all the friends, the African friends, so in that regard, I had African community, I could say. So, and then, my sister, my older sister Zondi, she would come and visit us. So I knew my siblings, I was able to grow up with them. We have a relationship, so my mom also had a son from her first marriage. So, this kind of like, even though my brother was white, but we all have like great relationships. So there was never any like friction between us. So, yeah.
Yeah, and by the time we were about 15, 16, 17, then that's when the ISD started. Well, we didn't actually call ourselves ISD, Initiative of Black People in Germany, yet. It was actually more, I would say, a group of Black Germans partying all the time. We went to the clubs. I remember we started going to clubs, first to the American clubs when we were 13, 14.
Yeah, but
going
with
on
our
21.
parents, right? They took us. Yeah, so that's, yeah.
We went with our parents, which was quite funny because lots of our friends couldn't understand that we go to clubs with our parents, but just our parents just loved to dance as well.
Well,
And,
yes.
so we had a great time. Spent a lot of time with GIs, which were still there in Berlin, and yeah, it was the 80s. It was lots of fun, and as I said, we were 14, 15 and snuggling into clubs, pretending we were 18.
18, right?
And,
Although this one particular club was owned by an African guy, so our parents knew him, so that's why we were able to get in. So it was more like, hey, we were there and everybody was watching over us. So, you know, when you hear now
Yes.
13, 14-year-olds going to the club, this is crazy. But it was more like, oh, all these people that we knew, you know, just basically watching over us, and we had fun, you know, just dancing, you know, knowing most of the people. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a clarifying question. So
Yeah.
you're back and forth, both of you, and actually the stories of how you then eventually make it to West Berlin are incredibly similar. I mean, that kind of, you know, maneuvering and pretending that you're going farther than you actually are.
Exactly.
So when you finally sort of both settle there, how did you find each other again, or were you in the same sort of Freundeskreis, or
yes, it was the same kind
work?
of friends, and our parents already knew each other from like in the 60s, so they were already friends before, you know, we became friends. But because things were kind of going different directions, and of course everybody had their kind of life, but I mean, there was always kind of a contact. So it wasn't like that they lost contact with each other. It might have been at a point, just not as often that we were able to get together, but it was never that our parents lost contact with each other. They were always in contact. And that's how we basically were able, when Jeannine came back from Africa, how we could connect again.
Yeah, and we traveled together. We went to Paris. We went to London together. So
Jeannine and I, we've been in different places at the same time. Yeah, and you know, when we were teenagers too, we would go visit my cousin in Paris. So we would spend several weeks there in Paris. My sister Jeannine and I, like the 3 J's. Yeah, we were always kind of together. Yeah.
So some other questions are popping up now in the Q&A. And Amy asks, were there any repercussions to moving to the West under false pretenses? So you mentioned maybe the Stasi file, but you were able to cross back in and visit and come back and forth. So yeah.
No, we didn't, because we didn't flee East Germany. Everything was legal. We had the papers. I mean, we could have moved to France and then come back and move to West Berlin. So just because the train, in Jeannine's case, was a plane, and my case it was a train, we just didn't take the train to France. We just, you know, stayed in West Berlin because my dad worked there, and it was actually on my 10th birthday. And so my dad's colleagues came and picked us up, and they had this Carnival, Volksfest, a big festival going on that was run by the Americans. So we went to that. So that's how I got in contact first time with like American ice cream and burgers and things like that. So that happened on my 10th birthday. Yeah. And here I am now in America, you know, so yeah.
And you mentioned in the expose that I read at the beginning that, you know, you put escaped to the West in you know, sort of quotations, right? So, or scare quotes. So did you think of it at the time as an escape? Or do you think of it now as an escape? Or do you think of it more in terms of reunification of a family?
Yes, for me, more like a reunification of a family, because, you know, if you think about escaping, you know, what's happening, you know, with people now in Ukraine, I mean, they're escaping from something, you know, so there is no comparison when we talk about. That's probably why we just put it in parentheses, because there were people that escaped. I mean, they tried either through diplomats that they knew, that they tried to escape, you know, with the fear of being detected, you know, so, but yeah, ours was a legal leaving of East Germany. So, you know, that's why it was escaped in parentheses.
Well, for me, I wasn't happy, because I had to, when my mom told me we go to Abidjan, I had no idea where is that. They speak French. I hadn't seen my dad in 2 years. He was as I said, he was a presence, but I didn't really know him. I had friends, I had my surroundings, I had my hobbies, and I had my life basically in East Germany and all that. As my mom packed up all her things, which wasn't that much, but it was basically a life decision. We moved to another continent, and at 11 years old, it was quite a shock when we arrived. I mean, everybody was nice, but it was completely different life. And I'm sure I would have adjusted because I went to school then. After a month, I went to École Pépinière in Abidjan, which was private school. And at first, they didn't know what to do with me because I didn't understand the word. And but children, they adjust quite quickly. So I'm sure, had it not been for different circumstances, mainly being me becoming very, very ill, we probably would have adjusted. But it was scary. And when my parents sent me back to East Germany, it was scary again because I was on my own. They had to send me back by myself. And I spent some time with my grandmother, who I had a close relationship with. And then my mom said, okay, we go to West Germany, which was another change. So I don't know, I wasn't really scared because, of course, I wanted to be where my mom was. And I had to reacquaint with my dad when he finally came back living with us, which was quite difficult for the teenager. I gave him a hard time. I apologize for that later. But in that respect, having Jeanette and her family really helped me a lot, just to feel that sense of bigger family again, to have somebody who had a shared experience, and that was quite important. Yeah, and we could talk about what was it like in East Germany, and that really helped. Yeah.
And that sort of funnels into actually another question. This is from Anne, who says, after moving to West Berlin, was, reflecting back, was your experience as Black Germans different from your experience in East Germany? Or how was it different?
I think I adjusted pretty well. I had just turned 10, and there was still summer break. So when we moved from east to west, first you had to go through this, I don't know what you call it, Übergangslager, where they put the people in so you can take care of all your paperwork. And I told my mom I still want to have, because in East Germany, they had 8 weeks summer vacation, but in West Germany, they only had 6. And I told my mom, I want to have my 8 weeks, so, and school was actually easy for me. I was actually ahead in school, because for some reason in East Germany, when it came to whatever they taught, they were ahead of at least what I came across because I got into 4th grade in West Berlin. And actually in 5th grade, I already went, because they have different levels of schools, and only in 5th grade, I already got into the gymnasium, which is kind of like a preparatory school. So when you finish that, you can go and go to college. So yeah, school, my parents had friends there too, so it wasn't too hard. And like Jeannine said, we spent a lot of time with each other. So the adjustment, even though Jeannine came later, a year later, but it wasn't too hard for me. Yes. So.
Well, I don't know. It's just different. I mean, East Germany was childhood, and now we went into adolescence, which is a difficult phase in your life anyway, no matter.
You're kind of going in and out again.
Can
Mm.
you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
yes.
You're
Now
coming
we
back.
can-
There you
You're
go.
coming back.
Can you hear me?
You're back to life.
Yeah, I was always there. I never went anywhere. No,
Yeah.
I was saying I was amazed by the consumerism. Everything was bigger than, of course, and it was more, and it was livelier than in East Germany. But then having the experience of living in Abidjan in between was also different, you know. So I had 3 places I had to compare basically, but I think I adjusted quite quickly as well. I mean, we just wanted to have fun. We just wanted to explore things. And as I said, around that time, we met other Black Germans, and it was the 80s. I mean, the war was still in existence. So West Berlin in particular was also a particular place. West Berlin wasn't West Germany. It was
No.
completely different. We had the different zones in the city. Or we had the French, the British, and the American, and of course the East was the Russian. And each zone was different, and we spent a lot of time with, as we said, with Americans, because they were the most fun, basically. And we spent a lot of time with Black Americans, of course. And we went to the clubs, we went to the barracks. And I remember one experience, the first time I actually went to cinema in one of the barracks. I don't know, was it McNair?
I think it was
barracks.
McNair. Mhm.
And just the
Movie theater.
experience of being in an American movie theater. I mean, everything was bigger. You had these big popcorn
Buckets,
and
yeah. Mhm.
buckets. Everybody was throwing food around and just talking. You didn't actually catch the movie. I think it was a quite silly movie anyway, but it was just the experience of just being in Germany or in Berlin, but surrounded by just Americans, and that was it was fun, you know. And that's actually also how I learned my first words of English, from song lyrics basically, and from my conversations with these people I met in the clubs. So it wasn't really there were not really deep conversations we had, but that was the start actually of rapping the English language, and that's when the interest came as well. Yeah.
So 2 related questions in the Q&A. So Anne asks, did Jeanette, did your father know Theodor Michael as a fellow Cameroonian immigrant?
No, he did
No.
not. He did not. And actually, I might have met Theodor, but not like,
Great.
but Jeannine knows him or knew him much better than I did. I didn't, my dad didn't know Theodor Michael, no.
Yeah, and Jeannine, John shared with us his short film where he talks with Theodor. And so Theodor Michael, being one of the famous Black German survivors of the Holocaust, which goes to the second question here from Corey. How did you experience the way in which West Germany engaged with Vergangenheitsbewältigung? So maybe a difference even in West and East Germany.
Oof, that's a loaded question. Vergangenheitsbewältigung. Well, when it comes to the history of Black people in Germany, there's lots to be learned still. As I said before, in the GDR, nothing like that happened. I mean, there is not much knowledge about Black people in the GDR. Now, you have to say the GDR only existed for 40 years, so that wasn't a long time, but still they had a history of Black, of foreigners, which is to this day completely untold. I mean, there were there were African students which came to West Germany, to East Germany, to Russia, to Poland, you name it. And this history, you don't find that much. There are few people who have actually researched on that, but there is not much on that. When it comes to the history of the Holocaust and the Second World War, Theodore was one of the most influential people who actually was able to tell his own story. I mean, we talk. I'm so glad he still managed to do that, because we encouraged him for years and years and years. Write down your story, because it's such an interesting story, and everybody who has the opportunity, please read his autobiography. It's just it's really. He was an actor. He survived basically the Holocaust. He was a diplomat. He was a journalist, and he ended his professional career as for the Bundesnachrichtendienst, which is the
comparable CIA
FBI.
or FBI.
No, the CIA.
FBI.
The FBI. So it's a really, really interesting story, and he was also, in his way, he was our grandfather for the Black German community, because up until very old age, he attended meetings, he gave lectures, and he was very involved in the Black German community, and we all loved him dearly. And unfortunately, he died 2.5 years ago. But there are also other figures which we should mention. Is Hans Masakoi. I don't know. He, if people know him, he used to be. Was he managing editor?
Managing editor of.
Yeah, and not many people know that he was German. He was born in Hamburg, and he actually met Theodore on a trip to in 1997, when a group of Black Germans went to Chicago University and to Howard University. Masakoi met actually at a meeting in Chicago, and there was quite an experience, and also to witness, which I can only recommend. So there are more and more to actually tell their own story. There are not many left. There is a younger generation who is actually looking into the history. I never learned anything about Black history at school, and at school books they have proved that.
You're in and out again, Jeannine.
And the good thing is happening. Hello?
Yeah,
Can you
now
hear me?
we can hear you. Yeah.
Hello?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't know what's no more people from our community looking into Black German history, and you can find stuff if you're looking for it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Yes, that part we heard. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw a question. Somebody was asking something about summer 1989.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, funny thing is, I lived in England when the wall came down. I was surprised as anybody else sitting in front of the TV in London, and I was like, "What is going on?" Actually took me 3 days to reach my sister in Germany, because the phones were calling to Germany was just like totally crazy. And I mean, that was before really cell phones. So yes. And then my sister telling me how crazy things are in Berlin. You can't get on the train. It's so full. It's so crowded. So yeah, I was not there. I lived from January 89 to June 1990. I lived in London. So that totally went by me. I wasn't there. I know my older sister, I think she was on the wall, at the wall, when when people were kind of like standing on the wall and all of that. Yeah, so she was there. But my younger sister, yeah, she just told me about it. So
Yeah, it's the same for me because I was also in London.
right,
I mean,
we
where
were there at
Jeanette
the
was.
same
I
time,
was
right?
We lived in London for the same time, and it was the same experience. However, my husband John, which was my husband then, he was actually in Berlin, and he also he was quite confused. His famous press conference on TV, and yeah.
You're in and
I
out
don't know.
again. We can't hear what you're saying.
Here. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, but it's still kind of it's picture going slow.
Yeah.
But yeah, was a crazy
Okay.
time, 89. So yeah, unfortunately, I can't say anything to that.
Yeah. um, so let's see here. So let's stay in the 80s for a minute, and
Mhm.
then we'll pop forward a little bit. So it says, oh, Anne says here, your generation brought Black German, brought to the fore really a Black German identity. They say here with Audre Lorde's inspiration. Maybe you can speak to that. In the Black German studies narrative in the US, Audre Lorde plays quite a big role. We know that she, visited Berlin. She ran a seminar, people went there, and Maya Ayin was there, and they wrote, Farbe bekennen as a sort of it's a manifestation out of that sort of seminar and everything. But maybe you could speak more from your perspective or your experience. How did that all happen?
Yeah, it was basically was nice to get together with other Black Germans, because you didn't have to explain yourself, because, of course, I see myself as German, but then, of course, when you look at me, people would then ask, oh, okay, but oh, your German is really good, and I'm like, well, yeah, sure, it's good. I am German, and then, trying to explain, father comes from here, mother comes from there. So we didn't have that when we were, with other Black Germans. It was like, okay, we all know we have one parent that is African or African American, or and so there was nothing we needed to explain. It was just easy being around each other and not having to explain anything. So that's how everything, I think, really kind of started. And then you had the people that wanted to become more political, but you still had the kind of group that really didn't, they were just there because they wanted to be together and have fun with each other, so yeah. But then you had a group that was like, okay, we need to be able to speak for us, instead of people talking about us, we need to speak for ourselves. So maybe Jeannine can say something more about it. I was like that we had this coming together was like just easy because we didn't have to explain ourselves. It was just easy getting together, nobody wanted to try to touch your hair, you didn't have to explain why your German was so great, and that the group was like, it was started out as just having fun and being around each other, but then there were people in the group too that wanted to get more political and be able to, hey, let's talk, that we can talk about ourselves instead of other people talking about or for us. So
yeah, unfortunately I lost the connection again, so I'm not quite sure. I missed about 2 minutes, but yeah, as Jeanette said, it was or as I mentioned earlier, it was just the party people coming together, and for me, getting into the political work was something that evolved from partying, because we came at a point where we thought, okay, partying is fine, but what do we want as a group? How do we want to define ourselves? And defining means, how do we name ourselves? The term Black German wasn't in existence up until the early 80s. And then how do we call ourselves? because there were so many derogative namings for us, which I'm not repeating. Everybody knows what we will call. And we said, no, that's not us. And then we came up with Afro-German, Black German, and just to make a statement. And the idea was, okay, we are a group of people, but how do we define ourselves and what do we want? So that's when the group meeting started. But at the same time, which is most influential, it was, of course, the women's work. I unfortunately haven't didn't have the opportunity to meet Audre Lorde, but I knew Mai Ayim. And as I said before, and I've written about Farbe bekennen, the book showing our colors was just, for me, it was the initial step, coming into a room full of beautiful Black women on a podium and telling their stories. And I just realized that's not exactly my story, but it's similar to my story. And my story is actually several stories. And I'm not alone. I mean, I knew I wasn't alone because I had Jeanette and her family, but there are so many of us. And there are different generations of us. That's when we started the annual meetings. My first annual meeting, Bundestreffen, was in 1986 in Wiesbaden. And as I said, the experience was, wow, so many Black people in one room, but so many old Black people in one room. And I realized, okay, there are Black Germans which were born in the 50s, in the 1950s, which had a completely different experience to my experience. And that's basically how it started, the awareness that we're not just here, but we have been here for quite some time. We have a history. We're not going away, and we come in all forms and shapes and sizes. And of course, we have differences, and we have disputes, but we are a community, and we are part of German history. And that continues up until today with the next generation, which is our children. And our children are probably now the 5th, 6th generation of Black Germans.
And we've talked to a few members of the Black German community who are in that generation, right? But from your perspective as people who were there sort of, in the 1980s with Farbe bekennen, with Mai Ayim, with the whole thing, what do you see as the difference between sort of the younger generations and your generation and even the older generations, the difference between sort of the work of these various generations?
Social media.
That'll do it.
No, seriously, I mean, seriously, that's the thing. They have, first of all, there are more of us. And secondly, they have other means to connect with
each other.
And they do. I mean, our children, they are, in contact. I mean, your daughter has visited us, and my son and your daughter, they hang out, and they hung out together in Berlin. And your son, he is a musician, and my son is a filmmaker, and my daughter makes music, and they can connect. And I'm not always sure whether it's the best means to communicate or to consume information. But as long as we as parents are still there to just shape them a bit and say, okay, listen, maybe you can take that book and read that book first. That's all fine by me. I'm so happy that they have this opportunity to travel. Okay, in the past 2 years they couldn't because of the pandemic, but they see themselves in a more cosmopolitan way than we ever did. And they have a more of a self, how do you say, self-esteem. They are very proud of themselves. They don't question themselves as much as we do. I mean, they do question themselves, but not because of their background. For them, it's it's not a problem to have different heritages. Why
Yes.
why not? You know, that's the
I
way
mean, I
the
wouldn't
world-
say that it might always be easy, and maybe it's also a different experience growing up in Germany as a Black German, and then growing up in the United States as someone who has German heritage, because in a way, my children felt that they were never really, you know, not that they were out, but that they were different. They felt they were different, I guess, because they got the experience of two different cultures. But that might be also a reason of having two different cultures, you know, when you have parents that come from two different backgrounds, but then, you know, even though they look Black, you know, they might still not be what people consider to be a Black or African American here, you know, because here you still have this very funny thing about, you know, oh, you know, you act so white, you know, but they would tell a Black child just because the child speaks proper English, you know, which makes no sense to me, you know, that kind of stuff. But so I'm just glad that my kids had the opportunity to travel to Germany, and seen some other things, because it widens their horizon. And you know, I think what Jeannine said, I think they see themselves as a person of the world, really. I mean, you know, that it's not okay. Yeah, by passport I'm German and American, but you know, I'm a citizen of the world.
Yeah, and the difference is also that for my generation, becoming aware of your Blackness and what it means was very much focused on the African American experience. I mean, the literature, we consumed the literature, we consumed the movies, the stories, and that has changed to a considerable extent, because being Black doesn't mean just being African American, and we realize that the African American history is different from the Black German history, and
Totally.
and Black German history is also Black German history, because it's not just one way to tell it. My children, for example, they have family. Yeah, they have family in Africa, but they also have family in the Caribbean, and they also have family in Sweden and all over the place. So for them, it's quite normal to have contact with their Ghanaian Swedish uncles and aunts, you know, and to know Black people whose first language is Swedish, for example, and the second language is Twi, and the third language is English, and a bit of German, and that's why. How do you say that? I don't envy them, but I'm really glad for them that they can grow up this way. We didn't have that choice, but we're not that old. We can still profit from it, but that's probably the reason why they're much stronger in their identity than we were at that time.
Mm-hmm. And maybe one point I want to make too is, you know, having lived in Germany, having lived in England, having lived here in the United States now, probably as long as I've lived in Germany, you know, this year, yeah. You know, racism, I've had the feeling I've experienced more racism here in the United States that I've ever experienced in Germany, which is kind of interesting. And always also having the feeling, you know, being treated like Jeannine said, it's kind of like, yeah, I can't say I have an African American experience, because I don't have all this, you know, those experiences people had here. But I think too, because of me growing up in Germany in a majority, you know, white society, and been able to, you know, maneuver in the society, I think here for me, I don't have this this experience of I can't talk to white people, or, because I had to feel my husband is African American. So, with me, when I moved here for the first time, we went to a wedding, and he went to a white wedding. We were the only two Black people at this wedding, and he's never experienced this before. And so for me, I've never felt kind of different, or it wasn't funny for me, because, in Germany, I was one of the very few too, so there was nothing special being the only Black person. But for him here in a society where you have a lot of African American or people of color, to see how they still, the white and the Black community here still has this kind of like difficulty coming together and interacting with each other. That was kind of new to me. So that was a very distinct experience for me being here in the United States,
Yeah, and go ahead, Jeannine. Sorry.
No, I just want to mention, having said that, I'm happy for my kids that they have these different identities. Yes, there is racism in Germany. Of course there is, and you experience it every day in different on different levels. But we have racial profiling. My son is 20 now, and he's always the one being picked out. He's quite vocal, and of course he doesn't accept it. So sometimes I'm a bit worried because he doesn't keep his mouth shut. He's always questioning things. You still have attacks, but you have more a discussion now about identity politics. That's what I call and cancel culture. That's a favorite term which is used now, because minorities are actually voicing their needs and their concerns, and they're not very nice about it. They're quite vocal about it. They're not always nice about it, and that of course triggers a reaction, because I think that the white middle class or established man is quite shocked about the how do you say, about the force of the demands. Basically, it's like, what do you want? I'm not a racist. The common position is, I'm not a racist. I've never done anything back to a Black person. Why do you attack me? And it's quite a strong discussion that's going on now about what should how far should minorities go in their demands, and what is the backlash from the white majority. So that discussion is still going on. I don't know where it's going to lead. I think everybody has to calm down at one point. As I mentioned, social media. Social media is something that has a lot of how do you say, a lot of God, I don't know, Vorteile.
Advantages
and connections, but it has also a lot of disadvantages, because the tone sometimes on social media, like especially Twitter, I think is something that concerns me. Yeah, because the anger and the hate that sometimes is spread through these social media is nothing that
constructive. I mean, we should be able to talk about things. Yeah.
You don't talk to each other when you scream, and if everybody screams, nobody's hearing anything.
Listening.
That's
Absolutely. So we should say that, Jeanette, you're in Indianapolis, which is, a Midwestern city, quite, racially segregated, I would say. Okay, really segregated. And Jeannine, you're in Berlin and where are your children? What are they? I don't want you to speak for them, but are they in the US? Are they in Germany? What kind
I
of
mean,
things
my
are they up
kids
to?
are all, I have all my 3 kids here in India again, in Indianapolis. My daughter lived for a year and a half in Japan and can't wait to go back there. She just wants to leave the United States. She doesn't want to be here. And my older son, he's like ready at least to get out of Indy because he thinks it's kind of getting too small. He needs to, I mean, young person, I
Yeah.
can understand. My youngest son, yeah, out of the Midwest, I think for him, it's still too, narrow-minded. I think if you are like a younger person, I think it's good for you. I'm all for it that they want to go other places, want to see other things, I mean, in the end, they might all decide, oh, Indy wasn't too bad, who knows? I don't know. I mean, my daughter, she's adamant. She's just like, I'm out of here. I'm not going to stay. So yeah, and I get to hear, so Mom, why did you come here? Why couldn't Dad come to Germany? I was like, well, I was the one that spoke the language. So I was like, okay, I come here. So they're kind of a little mad with me after our last trip to Germany in 2016. They were like, why did you do that? Why couldn't we have stayed here in Berlin? So yeah.
But now you have a cafe in Broad Ripple, right?
Yes, a coffee shop, and
Yes.
met my business partner Alice 2008, and she is a Japanese Brazilian. So you should see us at a farmer's market selling German bread. People look at us like, what? And she's actually a trained artisan baker in Germany. She was trained in Germany.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we're specializing here and we have our coffee shop and we bake German breads and pastries. Yes. And it's pretty authentic. So we've been told by quite a few Germans, they're like, you know what, your bread is even better than we find in Germany when we go over there. So yeah.
One of my students sent a question. She wasn't able to be here. She just wants to know, where did Perk Up Cafe get its name from?
Actually, we bought this coffee shop from a previous owner. I don't know how she came up. Maybe she was like, hey, coffee, and it perks you up.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where the name came from. That's what I'm assuming. We bought the coffee shop from her because when my business partner and I, when we started wanting to bake breads, it was hard to find a commercial kitchen. And so the coffee shop owner was like, well, if you put an oven in here, you can bake in here, We were like, okay. And then her mom got sick and she had to kind of, she wanted to get out of the coffee shop business. So basically we bought a coffee shop to have a kitchen to bake breads. That's basically how it worked out. Yes.
Wow. But do you do the cafe thing, the lattes and everything?
Yes, we do the lattes and everything. We still have our walk-up. We've been closed, I mean, indoors ever since the pandemic started, and we're doing quite well that way. So we're thinking maybe we want to do, I don't know if we're going to open a coffee shop per se, but we're going to, still do our breads and maybe want to sell more breads out of the coffee shop. So
sure. Yeah. Like I said, I'll be there the next time I'm in India.
Okay.
And Jeannine, can you tell us where you are, what you're up to, what your family's doing?
Well, my kids, they still live with us as well. I mean, my son is 20 and he just finished his studies last year. And of course, because of the pandemic, there wasn't that much chance to travel, but he's ready to, well, he's been traveling a lot during the past, 6 months, I think. And he wants to be, well, he is a filmmaker, I would say already. He's making films. He started also, well, he's got some acting jobs now, just to see what it's like, but I think he's more a person who wants to be behind the camera, but let's see where it leads him to. And my daughter is still at school. She's 16 and she's studying a lot. And by the way, my kids think that Berlin is the coolest city in the world, which doesn't mean that they want to
Maybe true. Yeah.
Which doesn't mean that they want to stay here forever, but it's pretty difficult if you live in a cool city then to get the urge to live somewhere else. Of course, they want to travel. We've traveled a lot with them over the years, so just for them to get a taste of the world. And I am in no rush to just check them out. I'd love having them there, but eventually whatever they want to do. Or maybe they come visit you in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
You know?
Or here in North Carolina.
Yeah.
There's not much.
Yeah. So we're quite happy with them and quite proud of
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
And I think my final question has to do with, and before we, wrap up for the day, I think that maybe we have to have a part 3. There's just so much we can talk about, but, and this really comes from Rosemary and I. How important is it to you that Black German life and history is documented for Black Germans and by Black Germans?
Well, I mean, it is. I mean, you don't want to hear a story that is written about you, where you might have talked to a couple people. That's why I'm so happy about this forum, because we basically can tell our story ourselves. It's not somebody telling our story for us. And there are so many different experiences, so you can't even say it's all sad, it's all great, but it comes directly from us. It's not through another person.
Yeah, I mean, we started doing that in the 80s already, when we founded the paper Afro-Look, for example. That was the first opportunity after Repercussions, of course, for Black people just to write stories, poems, whatever, express themselves. And the paper has been had existed for 12 years, I think, and that's also part of German history, Black German history, which was exclusively done by Black Germans. And I still like to read autobiographies and stories about the experience, but what I also would like to see is not just the history, which is of course important and which has to be told and discovered, rediscovered on a daily basis. I'd like also to look forward. I'd like to read more how do you say, from Black people about contemporary life. I mean, and I like to see it in movies and television, in other media. I mean, we have stories about, we have more and more Black characters on television and stories about Black characters, but we have no interaction. I mean, what I would like to see is a contemporary Black German family on German television, and it's not really how do you say, announced as the Black German family. No, it's a German family who happens to be Black. So I'd like to read that stories just as a normal thing, where the Blackness is not just the most important thing about the story, but it is just contemporary life in this country. And who else could do it but we, And that's why I encourage my son also to be behind the camera. It's not just what you see in front of the camera, but if you write the stories, the scripts, if you are the director, you make different, you tell different stories, and that's really important. I don't want other people to tell our stories, but I'm quite positive that will come, because the urge is there, the stories are there, the means are there. Hopefully the money will be there as well eventually, but it'll come, I'm sure.
Well, thank you, Jeannine and Jeanette, for allowing us to host you again. We're grateful for the honor of adding your testimonies twice to our media archive now. Many thanks also to Emily and to our generous sponsors for allowing this event and so many others to take place. Today's recording will soon join the series playlist on our YouTube channel at Black Germans. Please subscribe and turn on the notifications so that you will be advised as new ones are added. Sign up for our newsletter, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Eventbrite for details about future events. Be sure to join us on Monday as we close out our spring series with Dr. Heidi R. Lewis, author of In Audrey's Footsteps, Transnational Kitchen Table Talk in Berlin. Finally, we hope that you've been as enriched by today's conversation as we have, and we thank you for your time and attention. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you very
Thanks
much
for having us. Yeah, thank
for
you.
having us. Thank you for your questions. And yes, it was a pleasure.